Hey, Howard Jacobson here. Welcome to today's Plant Yourself podcast. A quick reminder, this podcast is free for everyone and supported by patrons. So if you would like to find out about becoming a patron of the show and helping us out, helping defray the cost, helping to spread the message, you can do so at plantyourself.com/gift. Thanks so much and enjoy today's episode. Hey, welcome to today's Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Let's get in the mood with a little music. So I'm going to be brief because I really want to get you to listen to today's interview with Shay Seaborne. Shay Seaborne is a CPTSD, which stands for a survivor of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. She is an activist, an advocate, and educator for healing from trauma, healing from abuse. She has a horrific story of childhood abuse, abuse as a teen, and a very difficult and troubled adulthood until she began to explore healing modalities that brought her back to herself. And we talk about this, and we talk about the nature of trauma and some of the theories and her own experiences with being traumatized and trying to find healing from the psychiatric profession, which instead incarcerated her essentially for as long as insurance would pay, and her path to reconnecting with herself. And then we talk about you and me and all of us and the traumas that are being re-triggered through this pandemic, through the lockdowns, through the quarantines, through the fear, through the uncertainty, through the financial stresses. What she says is that we are being re-triggered in old traumas. And so, of course, this is a terrible thing as we're acting them out unknowingly and inflicting them on ourselves and on others. But it's also an opportunity to explore them, to bring them to the light, and to begin to heal them. So the second half of our conversation is really Shay guiding us towards our own healing of trauma. Before we get there, just one quick announcement that pandemic pricing is still in effect for my laser coaching program, which is a year of unlimited one-on-one 15-minute sessions. And it's designed to help you take action continuously and consistently to get into the best health and best shape of your life. If you'd like to find out more, including how you can sign up for as low as $83 a month, check out plantyourself.com/laser. All right, let's get to today's conversation without further ado. Shay Seaborne, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to be talking about what I think the phrase you use that I love so much is how to stay off the trauma train. Especially during this time when things are so difficult for so many people. But I want to begin, since this is one of the first Zoom ones I've done. It says your name and then it says CPTSD. And so I wonder if you could begin by telling us what CPTSD is an abbreviation for.
It stands for complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what I've had since I was a little kid. And recently I decided to add it to the end of my creds because I've earned my PhD in it through living this way and also learning how to recover from it, intensive study on my own, because it's really hard to get help from the system for this kind of a neurological illness.
And so you refer to it as a neurological illness. I imagine that was already, thinking of it that way is already a little bit part of the healing. Because I think a lot of people who experience it just experience it as I'm crazy.
Yes, actually, I meant to say neurological injury, which it does. It absolves us of the guilt, or the stigma that we're just crazy, or all the things. I'm just not willing to let it go, or put it in the past, or I'm not trying hard enough, or praying the right words to the right God at the right church on the right day. All character flaws, right? All putting the onus for my condition on me, when it's actually on the environment in which I, grew up. My body and brain and spirit adapted to the deeply toxic home environment. And my life has been directed by it to this day. And it's led me to become a trauma awareness activist and artist, something I never imagined I would be. I just wanted to be a deckhand, and here I am advocating for trauma awareness and developmental trauma resolution for so many people that have it and don't even know it.
Can we, and titrate this as you will. I know in talking to you previously, you're a pretty open book, but I don't want to offend any boundaries. But what can you share about the injury and the original?
I'm so sorry for that. I have everything off, and my computer is calling things anyway. Sorry about that.
No worries. Sometimes it's very hard to get your computer to stop trying to get your attention.
Well, the thing is, I turned my phone off so it wouldn't ring. So it's not ringing, but when the call came in, it came in through the computer instead, which I can't.
Right. And as I subtly make sure my phone is on the off position too. So no harm, no foul.
Let's see, where were we? You have to get me back on the track here.
Right. I was asking you what you were willing to share about your injury, your neurological injury, about what happened. And
well, I'll keep it in really general terms. I can say that I've been through a lot of things that would make a lot of people sick if they knew the details. Through early childhood, in the parental home, and later I was groomed for further abuse by an acquaintance for about a year. So I've experienced, before I was 16, I experienced incest, rape multiple times, torture, suffocation, things like that. So really awful stuff. My ACE score is a 9. I'm pretty much a very atypical case. Most people haven't been through the kinds of things I've been through, thank goodness. If I can heal, other people can heal too.
Right. Sorry to interrupt. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Event Experiences. Mm-hmm. And like 10 is the maximum, right? Or
yes, on the typical scale that's used now. Mm-hmm.
So you're 9 out of 10.
Right. And that's from a landmark study that most doctors don't know about. I've had to educate my caregivers about it. It's a multi-decade study that started with like 17,000 participants by Kaiser in partnership with, I forget, some government agencies. And they found that people who had experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, types of adverse experiences, they had a strong likelihood of all sorts of social problems like incarceration, problems with school, with authority, with jobs. They tend to end up on the streets, in jail, or dead. Or
addicted.
Right. And then followed by the onset of chronic disease at midlife, and early death is the end. That's the typical trajectory for someone with an ACE score of 4 or more. And the more, obviously, the more adverse types of experiences, the harder it is to navigate through life with that kind of a trajectory.
Right. And this might be getting off topic a little bit, but I'm curious if there's research that you're aware of, or you can speak to physiological effects like chronic disease, autoimmune disease. Is there anything known about that as well?
Yeah, the ACE study shows that correlation very strongly. I can't remember all the numbers because PTSD, but the higher the ACE score a person has, especially if it's unresolved, which most of it is because we don't know we have it. We think just, life sucks and that's the way it is. I'm sorry, I lost the track again.
I was asking about the physiological symptoms.
Oh, yes, thank you. A very much higher incidence of chronic disease like diabetes, heart disease, fibromyalgia, all sorts of chronic disease. In fact, most of the chronic diseases are related to childhood adverse experiences.
Gotcha. So I'm imagining that someone's listening to this at this point saying, wow, I never went through what Shay went through. Yeah, I had some tough times, but I certainly wasn't capital T traumatized. But I know one of the things that you do in terms of awareness is help people realize when they have been traumatized, even if it doesn't look as dramatic and horrific as what you've described?
Yeah, pretty much everybody has been traumatized at some point in their life. It's part of life. And the problem is when we can't when we can't complete the trauma release cycle, that's when we get stuck in post-traumatic stress disorder, or in my case, complex, which means, many types. So the good news is we usually recover from a traumatic event, say a car accident. People around you support you and say, oh, that's terrible, and the insurance company takes care of things, and you get the medical care that you need, and people send you cards and flowers and hug you, and after a while you feel better, and maybe you kind of stop for a second at that intersection where it happened. There's a little upset there, but your life pretty much goes back to normal, and you don't really think about the event anymore. That's a typical, that's what we're made for. It's when we can't respond to complete the trauma cycle that it gets stuck inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, go ahead.
Yeah. But in terms of like the epidemic of trauma and unresolved trauma, do you think it's something to do with like our culture doesn't have the supports anymore? Like, it's hard for me to believe in a tribal village that the things that you described in your home would have gone on unaltered, that there would have been some sort of intervention, and that when people undergo sort of normal traumas, that there are rituals and ceremony and communal support to bring it back into balance. Because if you're a part of my tribal community and you're messed up, then my community is messed up and I'm messed up. So I have a vested interest in helping you resolve.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. That's actually the nature of trauma is disconnection. It happens when our inner and outer resources are not enough to match what's happening to us at that moment. So we either fight, freeze, or run, or freeze, or collapse. And if we can fight, or if we can run, that completes the trauma cycle, that gets that energy out, and we've saved ourselves, and we've come to a place where we feel safe. Just like when the zebra gets away from the lion and shakes itself off, and then it goes back to grazing like nothing happened, because it's completed that trauma release cycle. But when a child is abused by a parent, when a parent is the source of that child's terror, that child can't escape that. There is no escape. And so that resolution can never happen, especially if the abuse happens again and again and again. There's no chance for recovery. So it just piles up inside that organism. And modern mainstream psychology seems to consider developmental trauma and PTSD a brain problem. The most common treatment is with medications for, chemical imbalances in the brain. But trauma experts often say that trauma is actually a somatic experience. As soon as our red alert system goes up, all kinds of things are happening in our body. We're getting flooded with hormones. Our muscles are getting glucose to run or fight, and stress chemicals are going through us, and we lose connection to the part of our brain that helps us connect with people and make rational decisions, because everything's going into survival mode. And that's a really wonderful thing when your life is really in danger. But when it's a chronic state, it's really bad for the organism. It harms us from the inside.
So what was your chronic state, from the age of 16 on? It sounds like you got out of the situation environmentally at the age of 16?
No, it's just I got out of a particular type of abusive environment, but then back into my parental home, which was actually even more dangerous for me, psychologically. Physically safer, but psychologically not. That's when I became suicidal, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with, oh, come on, what's her name? Elizabeth Smart.
No, no.
She was 15 years old when she was abducted by a crazy couple, and she was kept as a slave for 10 months. And then she managed to get away, and she came back to her family, who, welcomed her with love and kindness and compassion, and got her therapy and medical care. And, they tracked down these culprits and they put them in jail. And she got so much support from her community and validation that this was a horrible thing. Well, that's kind of what I went through, except without all the family support. I came back to a father who let me know that whatever happened had been my fault, and I just needed to shut up and suck up. So that was probably the most brutal thing that ever happened to me, even more than the suffocation torture itself.
Right. So that when we don't feel validated in someone just telling us, yeah, this was horrible, then what happens? Then we start doubting. We start thinking it was our fault. Like, what did your father's words cement in you, or reinforce?
Yeah, the shame. Yeah, that it was my fault. That somehow I had chosen this arrangement. Out of poor decision making, when in actuality, my early childhood had primed me, had groomed me for this person to do these things to me. And it saddled me with basically his shame. Even if he hadn't been guilty of what he'd been guilty of, at that point, it was his shame that prevented him from getting me the mental health care that I needed and deserved at that point. And I had to take it on because my life depended on this person.
Now, in my experience, I don't know that many people who wouldn't get triggered by your story. So even if they were a stranger, and they hadn't felt somehow shame for like how they had primed you, just to hear that, it's really difficult for me to hear you describe, even in the gentlest, vaguest generalities of what you went through, without putting any pictures in my head. It's very hard for me to not want to shut you up, honestly, right? Because I don't want to feel this way. And I imagine there's very few people who are emotionally well resourced themselves to be able to give you the validation that you desperately need.
That is so true. And unfortunately, that even goes for people, professionals in the psychology field. I've had a hard time finding people who can, who understand trauma enough to separate themselves from their response. And what you bring up is really important. I'm a really big fan of Dr. Daniel J. Siegel, who talks about interpersonal neurobiology, and he talks about burnout, empathy burnout, and he says that's not empathy burnout, that's bad boundaries. People need to understand that you're over there with your feelings and I'm over here, and when I feel something in response to you, that's my empathy. It's not your distress, that's my empathy, and that's the part of me that connects with you neurologically and wants to respond to do something to help alleviate your pain. And when we can keep that separation between us with that boundary, we don't get the burnout, and it's so much easier to connect that way.
But I imagine it's maybe even specifically hard for mental health professionals, because on the one hand, when they see your pain, it can easily be an indictment of my inability to help you, right? Like, I can feel myself getting really frustrated sometimes as I'm coaching someone when they're not getting it. And when I check in and take a deep breath, the frustration is my own ego is feeling attacked because I'm not the world's best effing coach.
I imagine you're right, because in our culture, the doctor-patient relationship is usually defined by the doctor as, I'm the one who's well and can heal you, and you're the one who's sick and needs to be healed. And that right there puts such a separation between us. And in the work I've been doing through years of working different modalities with different therapists, I've learned that every relationship is mutual in some way. There's always a back and forth, even when it's, the surgeon and the patients, somebody that the surgeon is going to do this thing to, and they barely know the person, but there is some neurobiology going on between them, and the surgeon comes away with something as well. It's not just the patient. And the same goes for a positive therapeutic relationship.
And I say, also, if your trauma triggers my own unacknowledged, unresolved traumas, whether they be capital T or small t, whether they be commission or omission, and I have to think of myself as the well person, then I become even more agitated. And I was listening to Gabor Mate give a talk about what do you call vicarious trauma, and he says it's not vicarious trauma; it's your trauma that your patient or your client has triggered in you.
Yes, that's really common, and it's very common to not even know what the source of that is. Just like you said, you feel this discomfort, and not to be able to define it, especially if you haven't been able to do any of your trauma work. And that's one of the things that this pandemic is doing for people. When basically the whole world is in a pre-traumatic state, it's going to set off all sorts of unresolved trauma in pretty much everybody, and they're going to have short tempers and short attention span, and lose things and break things and feel frustrated and tearful and not know why they feel like they're going crazy. And a lot of that can be unresolved trauma. And that's why we need to be really gentle with ourselves and everybody else right now.
When you say the world is in a pre-traumatic state, what does that mean?
Well, on the trauma track, a pandemic would be maybe the first station. That's a chronic stress situation. But as the time goes on and we're, more disconnected because of physical distancing, I want to call it physical, not social, because we need the social connection. We need to figure out how to do that while we're physically distancing. And we're having more problems with finances and not knowing when this is going to end. And there are all kinds of political things going on. All that stuff can stir up unresolved issues. And we can find ourselves lashing out at the people we love the most and thinking we're going crazy. That's a really good sign that you're headed for the trauma train. And there are fortunately things that we can do to keep ourselves off that train from going further down the track. You don't want to end up in PTSD land where I am. I can tell you it's much easier to get off the train as soon as possible.
Gotcha. So before we talk about that, I want to get a little more of your story. So what did your CPTSD look like through your teens and into your 20s, and what were you trying to recover from it?
Well, of course, we didn't have a name for it back then. And I had, no insurance coverage and no real access to any regular mental health care. So I read a lot of self-help books. Still didn't explain what was going on with me. I journaled a lot. And I did sort of self-therapy. And, read a lot of books. I read I'm Okay, You're Okay when I was 14. I've long had a drive to, improve myself. Early adulthood.
Was that the transactional analysis stuff? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Byrne.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now I read that and I was fascinated by the idea of games. And at the same time, I felt a lot of shame. Like every page, he was like catching catching my cons. I wonder if you had sort of a similar experience, or was it liberating? Because I found it fascinating, but not at all liberating. I felt like I was a criminal.
Wow. Well, I read that too, Games People Play, when I was 14 also. and I guess I didn't have a sense of myself as, having formulated any games yet, but I could see how my relationship with my mother was heading in that direction. And it helped me understand her. She's mentally ill. It helped me understand, her a lot better, which helped me navigate with her better. But I don't think I had shame about it at that point, because for me, the book seemed to normalize it. Well, this is what people do. And for me, having the awareness was a real gift.
Uh-huh. Right. Okay. Yeah, I can see that from being clearly victimized, that it gave you a different flavor of the information than it gave me. I think I felt kind of guilty about myself. Like, so I could see myself as the perpetrator in a lot of these games.
Well, I know we all are at some point. So that's understandable. Yeah. For me, any book like that could help, it kind of validated my reality. And the people around me weren't doing that. So it was really helpful to have something that said, oh yeah, things aren't right here, even though it wasn't nearly close, to what was actually going on.
Right. So
and
yeah, go ahead.
That probably drove my interest in psychology. When I was in high school, one place we were allowed to, have electives, and one was psychology. Well, I hopped on that, and that really helped me out as well, and, continued my personal interest in it. I ended up in my early 20s working for the Yes Educational Society, which publishes an alternative health kind of newspaper on the East Coast. And we had a lot of workshops on, shamanic journeying, and we had Ram Dass come and talk, and Sun Bear, and all these different people that I was exposed to, in a close-in way, and that really influenced me as well, and so did the teachings of Don Juan. So I have this kind of weird, eclectic, mainstream psychology, hippie mix of influences going on.
Well, it's interesting because, sort of Western psychology that has become so heavily cognitively biased and then brain biased as it shifted into psychiatry didn't really have a model for this, but the shamanic cultures did. The ancient wisdom traditions knew what people were capable of and the effects it could have.
Yes, right?
And
those, the plant medicines have been historically a big part of that, and those are exactly the things that have been made criminal in America. And that's actually one of my pet peeves. There are substances that can help resolve my PTSD relatively quickly. Like
what?
Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is in phase 3 trials with substances like MDMA and psilocybin. LSD has also been used, and ketamine. I don't think LSD is being used mainstream anymore, but I don't know. It could be. So with one of these protocols, in 3 months, people with PTSD find tremendous relief, and the majority of them their symptoms are so abated they're no longer classified as having PTSD. I would love to do this. Well, there's one place in the country I know I could do this, and it's in Denver, and I can't go live in Denver for 3 months to do this. It's all stuff that's been around for a long time, and the studies are very supportive. But even if and when it's legalized, who's going to have access to the specific protocol? It's a very specialized kind of medicine. Well, I'm going to be really bold here and reveal that I've been doing this on my own for over a year. And it's pretty much the same thing I was doing in my little apartment when I was 19. I do cannabis-assisted self-directed therapy. And cannabis can be used as a psychedelic agent, and that's how I use it. It reduces my anxiety and allows me to connect with the original abuse scene without being overwhelmed, and thereby give myself the compassionate witnessing that, as you said, I so desperately need, and resolve this much of my trauma each time I do one of these sessions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a while back, I had a couple on the podcast who run an ibogaine retreat in Costa Rica. And they were talking about not just, the plant's pharmacology, but the plant's consciousness and intelligence and spirit.
That sounds interesting. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, well, just the idea that when, like you talked about coming back from trauma and having the difference that community support could make for Elizabeth Smart. Well, there's a more than human community, right? And since humans tend to be so bad at providing this kind of support, that that plants and animals like dogs and cats and dolphins and elephants and many others seem to kind of have the knack of being able to hold us without themselves cracking in any way.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Animals have been definitely a help for me, especially in the last few months. I've been able to spend some time with horses, and the animals can co-regulate with us as well. In fact, really interesting, there's a dog in the neighborhood, Great Pyrenees, and I got to know her late last year and early this year. And then I had...
What's her name?
Her name is Lady.
Lady.
And she's obviously a rescue. We got to be friends. Then I had major surgery, and the trauma of that so janked up my nervous system that Lady wouldn't come near me for months afterward. She could read my nervous system. I felt really like I was going to die for 5 weeks. I could barely just make myself do the things I had to do every day. And I just felt, totally traumatized. And every time Lady would see me, she would look at me like she wanted to come, and then she'd back away until about the 3-month mark. So just a few weeks ago, and then she could approach me again.
So in some ways distressing, but in some ways a really good model of having your own authentic boundaries. Yes,
dogs are really good at that. My therapist dog does the same thing. She really likes me. And of course, this is, pre-COVID. And she will sit in my lap, and she doesn't sit in anybody else's lap. But if I go in there really janked up, she'll stay on the other side of the room.
Right. So as you went into your 20s and early adulthood, what was the CPTSD like? What was the experience of it? What did it cost you?
Well, it interfered with every single relationship I had. I tended to be in dysfunctional relationships where I was subconsciously recreating that with either of my parents, trying to win the affection and attention and approval of somebody who wasn't capable of doing that. I moved around a lot. I went to live on the Piscataway Indians' land for a summer, and then their farm for another summer. I spent some time living in a tent, had, jobs here and there, never had a career, went in and out of college. I think I spent about 4 years getting 1 year of college credits. I really struggled with myself, with relationships, with employment, with money, pretty much everything. Life was just a really difficult struggle.
And what was the story you told yourself at that point, without having the knowledge that you've accrued about trauma and recovery?
Well, I had memory of, the abuse that happened in my teen years. So I knew that had a lot to do with what was wrong with me. But I couldn't understand why I cried every time I talked about it, because everybody acted like, oh, that was your boyfriend. And so that's what I thought it was. and the relationship between me and my slave master was so much like that between me and my father that there wasn't a whole lot of difference. It felt normal to me. I thought, this is just what life is. Life is a horrible struggle. And when you die, it's a relief. And sometimes I still feel that way.
So when you were like, going from place to place, job to job, course to course, did you feel like untrustworthy to yourself? Like, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but I know that there are times when I don't feel trustworthy to myself, and so therefore I don't trust my impressions of anybody else. If that,
I think that was a big part of it, subconsciously. I couldn't trust myself because I'd been taught, through my whole life that all the bad things that had happened to me were my fault and that I deserved them. I was inherently flawed and could never measure up. That led me to be unable to rely on myself in some ways that I can do now, but also it disabled me. It wasn't, all choice. A lot of it was just being disabled. When your prefrontal cortex is walled off from trauma, because of trauma, you can't really make good decisions.
mm-hmm. Because the prefrontal cortex is not getting sort of the afferent information from the body, right? The heart brain and the gut brain. And I'm not speaking woo woo for metaphorically, but
right. Yeah.
Neurologically.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We know we have three brains: head, gut, and heart. So, they all need to connect. I had neurofeedback several years ago, and when I went in to have my analysis read, she said, do you like things, do you want the cold hard truth, or do you like things sugar coated? I said, give me the hard truth. She said, well, most people have a bridge between their prefrontal cortex and the rest of your brain. You don't. You have a wall. I had no idea what that meant. Now I do. It means that part of my brain, the executive functioning part of my brain, is not literally cut off, but it's very much inaccessible because of all the trauma. And that was very liberating for me to understand the neurobiology. My brain is built differently. It's not my fault. It's a response to the environment in which my brain was formed. And that helps me start to learn some self-compassion.
In other words, had your brain remained in its original plastic shape and structure as you went through these traumas, you would not have survived.
Right. The traumas actually built my brain the way it is. It's just like any organism responds to its environment. I like to say I'm monster built. That's what wired me.
Uh-huh. So what were the first things that led you on the path to healing? People, modalities, books, practices?
The very first thing was a newspaper announcement for a survivor t-shirt workshop being hosted by a local rape crisis center in Virginia. And it gave a description that people who had survived sexual violence could come in and decorate a t-shirt that would be used as part of this clothesline project. And the t-shirts were color-coded for different types of violence. And one of them was, I think it was white, for childhood sexual abuse. And I went, oh, that's what happened to me. I finally had a name for it. So after several months, I called the Rape Crisis Center and broke into tears when they answered the phone and they said, come on in. And I broke into tears again. And that's what started my healing process for, the teen abuse. At that point, I hadn't remembered a lot of the earlier abuse. And that started coming as I started feeling safer, going through the recovery process.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like two of the key aspects were the community and the normalization.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. And those are two things that, were absent up to that point. Yes, having a place where I could talk about it and people went, yeah, we know what that is and we're really sorry it happened to you and we really want to help you and here's some things that you can do right now to feel better. And that is a big part of what's lacking in, mainstream culture. I think, there's certainly pockets of culture where there are communities, but, bedroom America doesn't have much community, and people couldn't see what was going on, and there was nobody safe enough for me to tell it to.
Mm. Now you mentioned neurofeedback and the body being it's a trauma is somatic and not just mental. So what did you how did you lead your body into healing? How did the body get involved and not just sort of talking and drawing T-shirts and
Well, actually, drawing T-shirts is a type of somatic healing process. It can be very helpful. Any kind of artwork can be very therapeutic. I didn't have any sense of that at the time. I really only came into the info about somatic work in the last few years. I left my old life 5 years ago, quit my horrible job, gave away my stuff, kicked out my young adult kids, and sold my house at a loss in order to go sail tall ships. And I did that for a couple of years before all the physical pain became too unbearable. It's a wonderful life. I had so many great adventures and met so many amazing, interesting people, but it's also a very harsh life. And the toll it was taking on my body made me have to stop and get an apartment. Then I got mental health insurance coverage for the first time almost 2 years ago. And I thought, great, I'm going to get some mental health care. And at that point, I had remembered a lot about, what had happened when I was young. And I got on the trauma train. They put me on a medication that causes intense suicidal ideations. They wouldn't listen to me when I told them I was having them, and I thought it was the medication. And I kept saying it, and they kept ignoring me until I ended up in the ER. And from there, I was shuttled to the mental hospital where I did not need to be, where they keep people until their insurance money runs out, whether they need to be there or not. And so I ended up being, re-traumatized over and over again through that process, and feel like I still haven't recovered from that specific trauma this far down the road. So it was after that I really started diving into the somatic stuff, because I had to go deeper than what I was getting. And I could tell I wasn't going to get the help from the system that, was supposed to help me.
Sounds like they were just experts at re-traumatizing.
Yeah. It's like the system, and really what I saw, it's like the system is set up to monetize trauma. And I hate to say that, but it really looks like it. After I got out of the hospital, I found out that BuzzFeed had done an investigative report on the parent company a few years before, and showed that they make their 30% profit by cutting staff and services and not providing any actual health care. And they hold people against their will, threaten them. And that's exactly what I saw. And yet a year and a half had passed between that investigative report and my incarceration, and nobody was talking about it in my state at all. It's like it was all okay. How when a report comes out like this, how can anybody let this keep happening?
Well, is there something of a, my word against yours, like the psychiatric experts and then a bunch of traumatized people, like just in terms of, the PR spin on it, like one group just seems more authoritative.
Well, of course. Yeah. The hospital and the emergency department and the prescribing physician and the psychologist all have everything on their side. They have the law, they have the corporations, they have the money, they have the power. I have me, that's all. Other people I talked to in the hospital gave me their contact info, because once I realized what they were doing there, I'm like, okay, just call me Nellie fucking Bly. And I started taking notes and talking to people. And you know, someday I'll file a report when I'm ready. But people told me they had very similar experiences to me. They thought they were going to get, you know, 2 or 3 days of even maybe like, you know, outpatient care, and they were hoodwinked in there, not given their rights. Their rights were violated. And yeah, there's a stigma. I talk about being in the mental hospital. I talk about PTSD. I have nothing to be ashamed of, but I know a lot of people go, yeah, she's crazy. She was in the mental hospital, you know, like that label kind of invalidates anything that you might want to say. If they, you know, it's a great way to just blow off every single concern.
Right. I remember when I was 7 years old that the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party had to drop out when it was discovered that he'd like seen a shrink.
Yeah. Isn't that sad? Well, and the really sad thing about the whole system is it is set up to pathologize normal human responses to abnormal situations. I forget who, one of the trauma experts only half joked, saying that if the DSM included developmental trauma, it would be a very thin volume because almost everything else would fall beneath it. And it seems to me like our entire culture sweeps this developmental trauma, which is the #1 health crisis in the world, sweeps it under the rug. We don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and not to compare them, but to see a parallelism. I think the medical profession does exactly the same with all our, you know, chronic diseases. That somehow diabetes or heart disease or autoimmune, these are normal reactions to abnormal foods and environments. Right.
Yeah, and yes, and that's, of course, you know, a lot of it is tied to adverse childhood experiences. You know, even for adverse childhood experiences, say, you know, you had a parent who spanked you a lot, you know, physical abuse. You had somebody in the house who went to jail. Your parents screamed at each other a lot. You saw some domestic violence one time. That's 4. That can really have a tremendous effect on those specific diseases, but the doctors don't talk about that, and they don't even understand when you bring it up. I don't know how many I've you know, brought this up to, and they look at me like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, so now that we've sort of established your cred, how do we, you know, those of us who have trauma, which is to say, look in the mirror, and if there's a face looking back at you, you probably have some trauma. You're in a society that probably wasn't capable of allowing you to fully resolve it. And now we're in this, what you call the pre-traumatic state that's slipping in through the physical distancing, through financial uncertainty, through future uncertainty, through the tremendous political and social fractures that we're seeing. What can we do if we feel ourselves starting to board the trauma train?
Well, we need to really protect our nervous systems from the trauma, which really is as simple as turning away from the things that make you feel janked up and turning toward the things that make you feel goodness inside you. Not good as in, I smashed that guy with my big words, but in, I feel good inside. I'm going to make recommendations for things that I need to pay attention to myself. Really pay attention to what's going on in your internal state. When you start to feel that excitement about, you know, going to battle on Facebook again, stop for a second and say, is this really good for my nervous system? Is this the kind of thing I want to cultivate in myself? Because even though it can be really fun and exciting and you get that dopamine rush, it's wiring your nervous system for all the things that are bad for you, including that chronic disease at midlife followed by early death.
So the thing that feels good in the moment, just like, you know, eating that candy bar feels really good in the moment, right? It's a distraction. It's like, you know, rage makes me feel powerful and in control for a little while, but there's a hangover.
Right. Yeah. We all need coping tools to deal with the pandemic stress. And it's a really good idea to consciously choose the ones that have little or no blowback, or you can actually choose ones that help you advance rather than give you any blowback at all.
Like what?
Well, mindfulness is really important. I kind of touched on that there. A lot of us are so caught up in thinking about what's going to happen next and making our plans and how we're going to deal with our commute and what we're going to say to our boss when we get there, or how we're going to react next time Uncle Joe brings up that political thing again, that we don't stop and notice how we feel inside our bodies. And that's a really important resource. So you can just take a moment and check in. Notice, do you feel your feet on the floor? If you're sitting, do you feel your butt in the chair? If you can't feel those things, you're really jacking up your nervous system by staying there. So you need to learn how to downregulate. In fact, if I could teach everybody in the world one thing, it would be how to downregulate themselves. You want to try it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is a common exercise, but I've taken like all the elements that I like from different modalities. So your mileage will vary, but these are all, every element that I put in is known to help calm the nervous system and foster a sense of wellness and well-being and goodness inside.
Okay.
So,
should I be sitting down, or right now I'm at my standing desk?
Whatever's comfortable for you.
I'm going to sit. I'm going to sit.
Okay.
I'm going to drop the desk and grab the little red ball behind me. All right.
Okay. So the first thing would be just to notice the space around you, to sort of orient yourself in the room. This helps bring you down to the here and now, because when you're present and embodied, you're usually not going to need to be in fight, flight, or freeze mode. There are two different things. So you're orienting yourself to the room, noticing the surroundings, and as my Alexander technique instructor friend Imogen likes to say, notice the support of your surroundings, which is a really nice, look at how you smiled when you just like thought that thought. You're like, yeah, that's kind of a nice thing.
Meaning like I'm not like falling to the center of the earth. I'm not floating away.
Yeah. And I don't know about your place, but for me, this is the first place I've had where I chose things because of how they make me feel, of how I enjoy the way they look, or the relationship I have with them, or what I think about, that was my grandmother's or whatever. And so I can look around my place and go, oh, that makes me happy. This makes me happy. I know the blacksmith who made those hooks, that kind of thing. I feel the support of the blacksmith's hooks in my face because I know her. And it's just a nice idea to think that your surroundings can be supportive of you, especially in the pandemic when we can't, have that support of other people as often. So yeah, orient to the room, feel your feet on the floor, feel your sit bones on the ball. And then we're going to do 3 smiling, conscious breaths, smiling, mindful breaths. So we're going to breathe in to the count of 4 or 5, and then exhale to 3. I'm sorry, hold and then exhale to 3, then inhale again with the same count and exhale again. But we're also going to add the flower and the candle to this because I like them. So when we inhale, we imagine we have our favorite smelling flower, and we're going to breathe that in as we inhale.
Okay.
See how it feels to just imagine that as fully as you can. That flower's in your hand. You're like, did that affected your state right there, didn't it?
Uh-huh.
I can see by your smile, and you like your face relax more. You look happier. Our brain doesn't know the difference between smelling the real flower and imagining it. And so when we do something that brings us that feeling of goodness and pleasure, we're wiring ourselves for more of that. If we focus on the dog do on Facebook, we're wiring ourselves more for that. Okay, so that's the inhale. And then with the exhale, I like to imagine I'm blowing out a candle. So the flower turns into a candle, and then, and yeah, if you make a sound like that, that's even better neurologically. So we're going to do 3 flower inhales and candle exhales with the pause in between. So I think I'll talk you through it, and then I'll do it with you. We'll do it twice. How's that? So
Sounds
we can
great.
co-regulate.
All right.
Okay. So smiling flower, inhale to the count of 6. Hold for 3. Blow that candle out for 6. Make the noise. And then when you're ready, another inhale with the flower to the count of 6. Hold for 3. Blow out the candle. And if you can pause at the end of that exhale for a couple of seconds, or however long you can do it without discomfort, that's really, really good for the nervous system. Let's see, that was twice, right? PTSD brain. Okay.
Tell me to breathe again, please.
Okay.
If I lose internet,
Right.
who's going to save me?
Okay, you've got to get me back on track here.
Yeah. I'm just, have you know the movie Office Space?
I think I saw that once.
Where he gets hypnotized and then the therapist drops dead, and so the hypnosis, like he no longer gives a shit about anything, and he becomes like the world's most chill guy. So that's just where my mind went. You wouldn't tell me to inhale again. All right, we got one more, and then we'll do it together, right?
Okay, yeah. All right. So flowers again for 6 seconds, and then hold for 3. Exhale for 6. Hold for 3. Now we had a lot of laughter in there, so you didn't get the pure benefit of that exercise. But I have to say, I have to put in a good word for laughter too. It's so important for our health, especially these days. I'm doing attending laughter yoga sessions online, which is wonderful. It sounds pretty weird, and it is, but just laughing with other people, and even though like we are through the computer, we're not co-regulating the same as if we were in the same room, but we're reading each other's energy in a very similar fashion and getting the benefit of that. So when you're laughing that way too, it builds bonds. It creates that open, curious, pro-social state that is our birthright. That's where we want to be. And it feels to me like that laughing about, your breath helped us achieve that state together. I don't know if we need to do the breath again.
Okay. Well, I think the instructions are clear enough that folks listening at home, people used to listen on their commutes. I don't think people commute anymore. So
no, hopefully they don't. There are a couple other down-regulating things I'd like to throw in there too. When I do this myself, one thing is if you can touch yourself in a way that crosses your midline. I like to do it with my hands because it's harder to do with my feet. That helps. And you can also stroke your upper arms as in whatever way makes you feel relaxed and soothing. I find for me, I just need it to be like really slow and light. And not just like I can almost feel the tension just rolling out of myself when I do that. And
so the visual here is sort of like hugging ourselves across the front, and then just stroking up and down. Yeah.
Usually I think slow. Looks like you're going pretty slow too. So, but whatever helps you feel that sense of calm and goodness inside. And that's really what we need to orient ourselves toward. We need to pay attention to what's going on in our heads and in our bodies and orient ourselves to the things that make us feel good and whole and open and curious and connected.
Mm-hmm.
When we get into traumatic stress, we tend to be protective and reactive and close ourselves off from each other. And that's part of the process of going down the trauma train line. We are neurologically wired to be with each other and co-regulate and help each other heal.
Mm. And the sort of holding myself and the breathing, like they don't feel like they require a lot of effort or struggle or bravery. Like when I think about facing trauma, I think about going into pain, suffering, like re-experiencing it in a safe place. And I think there is that. But this invitation, first of all, if you're not yet on the trauma train, this can keep you off.
It's one of the many things that can help keep you off. Yeah. Well, first I want to say, yes, we think of trauma as you have to go re-experience it all. There are modalities where you don't have to remember anything. Unfortunately, they don't work for me. I have to know what happened. And it may be partly due to the magnitude of, the trauma I experienced, but you don't have to remember. There's several different types, like the brain spotting and even Alexander technique. I use that a lot. It's not therapy. It's great that it's not therapy, but it's very therapeutic. I keep telling my friend Imogen, this stuff's really in line with neurobiology of healing trauma and interpersonal neurobiology, because it's so gentle and universal, and it's very subtle but very powerful. I find I don't have to think about my trauma. But if I am dealing with some aspect of it, I can use the Alexander to help me titrate that as well.
Mm. Mm. And what else? If people are listening and they're wondering where to go because all they've seen is like the cognitive stuff that just makes them feel worse about their dysfunctional thinking.
Actually, if you have a lot of trauma, cognitive isn't going to help you very much. It can actually re-traumatize you. It's not a good idea to go there first if you know you have a lot of trauma. If you're not sure, give it a try. It works really well for a lot of people.
I think about cognitive behavioral therapy as like a salesperson trying to sell to the CEO. And if you can get in to sit down and talk to the CEO and the CEO gives you their attention, then it's perfect.
Yes.
But if there's a gatekeeper who's keeping you out, then it's just going to frustrate everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a painting I'll show you real quick of for me, this is why we need trauma-informed care. So the guy over there on the side is trying to sell me. He's a salesman trying to sell me the CBT while the monster's chewing me to bits.
And the conversation bubble is, have you thought about how you can make better choices?
Yeah, he can't even see the monsters chewing me up because he's not trauma aware, not trained. So he thinks that by telling me I could make better choices, that's going to fix what's wrong with me.
Right. So we talked about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. We've talked about doing it yourself, about mind-body awareness through the breathing and the bilateral touching. Other things?
One of the things that really helped me with learning to get into my body was Eckhart Tolle's Gateways to Now. The Gateway to the Inner Body, I think it's called. He has such a wonderful, calming, soothing voice, and it just felt very comforting to me and non-threatening. It was so gentle. But even then, I had to do it just in little bits. It's really important to listen to your instincts about how much you can take and not push it. I know, because I'm the pushy type. I'm like, got to get through this. But now I understand when, if I'm listening to something like that and I start to feel really uncomfortable, I know it's time to stop and do something different. There's no point in pushing through. I'm seeing a somatic experiencing therapist right now, and she says, yeah, the slow way is the fast way when it comes to trauma. And I still have trouble believing it, but now that I've been working with her for about 6 months, I can really understand that. Movement therapy is a wonderful modality.
Dance
movement therapy, yeah. It can be really fun too. For me, I had sessions with a woman named Orit Krug, and she does video only, which seemed weird at first to do therapy by video, especially dance movement. But it was amazing how much we could even experiment with like how close I am to you versus how far and what's comfortable. And for me, the video added a layer of safety. But, even if you don't want to go into therapy, Alexander technique is wonderful. Drum circles, laughter yoga, anything that gets you moving in unison with other people, in community with other people, especially if you can make eye contact. Now, of course, all this stuff is really difficult with the physical distancing we need to do, but it's not impossible. We see people getting together, meeting out in spaces, with enough room for the distancing.
Yeah. And I want to follow up when you talked about, Eckhart Tolle and the gateway to the inner body and the fact that you had to kind of take it at your own pace. I think, the spiritual world can be a very healing world for people with trauma. It can also be very dangerous, right? Because you can't give yourself over to a guru.
No.
Right? and there's a lot of spirituality that tells the story that you manifested everything.
Right. And that's something I keep bumping up against and punching back at, because it's just so awful. There's a spiritual bypass. So many times people said, well, just let it go, or, karma's a bitch, or whatever. And using their version of spirituality basically to do to me what my family did, which was to blame me for what happened to me when I was a kid, and to blame me for the way that I was wired by the environment I was wired in. So I talk back to that a lot. I have my own spirituality. I call it eclectic experientialism. Or sometimes I say I'm a Frisbee-farian. We believe that when you die, your soul gets stuck on the roof and then you get stoned. But mostly I take, I borrow from different beliefs that feel right to me. So I had to, because growing up and hearing about this, grandfather in the sky that metes out rewards and punishments, convinced me that I was God's cosmic punching clown. You can see him back here. That I was put here only for God's amusement, to, beat me up and take things away from me and laugh at me. And that's just such a brutal dogma. And I think it's a natural response to that kind of dogma, the one meting out the rewards and punishment. I think a lot of Buddhism actually is really good for people with developmental trauma, and not necessarily even the spiritual, but the philosophical practice of it can be really, really calming and soothing for somebody who's been through too much.
And one final question. So you've done a lot of work, obviously, on yourself, advocating and educating others. And you've referred several times to my PTSD brain, and I'm still working on things. There's no romantic idea of a cure here that you're ever, it'll be like it never happened. Right?
No. Even if, say, suddenly one of those 3-month protocols was available to me, immediately at no cost, with no negative blowback. And there's no way that it could undo, what was done and all the things that I missed out on because of it. And I don't have any illusion that there is going to be any miracle. I've tried to find them, and they're not there. But the miracle really for me is neuroplasticity. The neurobiology of fear can destroy us unless we know, if we understand even a little bit of it, we can use it to help us heal. And everybody has an innate healing capability. And really the main thing is to, find what works for you. There's so many options out there. And especially now, oh my gosh, you get online and you can find, free trauma summit all over the place, or resiliency summit, and sign up for them for free and watch just one. Find a description of a practitioner you like, or their course they like. Listen to that one thing, and then maybe go to their website and see if there's some more free info there. A lot of times there are. Find them on Facebook. My deep process psychologist David Bedrick is on Facebook, and he gives stuff away all the time. He does these wonderful what do they call it? Facebook live videos on various aspects of healing and dreaming, and he has classes and lots of posts. Just there's so many people out there that are offering free support right now that anybody could find something that speaks to them. And whatever it is, go for that. And if it doesn't work out, find something else that speaks to you. Keep trying until you find what works for you. And really, if you can find one thing that you can sprinkle throughout your day, that's one of the things I love about Alexander technique. I can apply it to washing my hands, or driving the car, or I just notice I'm tense, so I'm going to, just take a moment to do the cycle. And you can incorporate it throughout your day, and that's how you rebuild a new nervous system. And that's my hope.
Nice. And just, to tie it into a more common theme of this podcast, which is sort of nutrition and health behaviors, that if people find themselves inexplicably binging or sabotaging their health behaviors, and they've tried everything and nothing has worked, I would say that probably an unresolved trauma is the missing piece here.
I'd say it's really likely. When I see somebody who's very overweight, very heavy, and looks unhappy, I know in my heart that they have some kind of, developmental trauma that they haven't had the resources to face. And that's the thing. One of the things we really have to do is be so kind to ourselves, because we do have the innate ability to heal, and we have the drive to heal. But in order to do that, we have to have the safe space to do it. That's number one. If you don't feel safe in your home environment, or in your life in general, or you don't have, a safe confidant or whatever it is to do the processing, you can't move forward. And we all naturally heal when we have the resources. So we can't blame ourselves for not healing, 20 years ago. God, if I could have done this 20 years ago, I didn't have the resources. I just have them now. And I have to say, there's been no better time to have PTSD. There are so many great resources out there.
Yeah. And it seems like we can heal each other, that you don't have to find the person who is completely healed, that if you have the intention and we start to understand these dynamics and we come together, we can weave together a community that's somehow, like a meta organism that can be healed before each of us individually is healed.
I used to think that stuff was pretty wackadoodle, but now the more I understand interpersonal neurobiology, the more I recognize that that's probably true. Especially the part about, being able to heal each other. What a traumatized person needs most is compassionate witnessing from another human being. And like you said, sometimes it's really hard to get if your trauma is so awful and the people around you don't have the tolerance for it. But, you know, just reaching out to somebody and saying, I don't understand what happened to you, but I can tell it's really bad and I'm sorry and I wish I could fix that for you. Right there, that's a little bit of healing. And it doesn't take much effort to do that for somebody else.
Yeah. I remember a book that was very important to me, I want to say 30 years ago, pretty much, was called How Can I Help? By Ram Dass and Paul Gorman. And the last chapter, I remember the title of the last chapter was called Walking Each Other Home, which that's sort of the metaphor.
I love his saying about that. We're all walking each other home. And I'd say that's probably like the core of my spiritual belief, you know, that we're here to help each other and help each other heal and connect with each other and have a shared positive experience. And that's part of our birthright. And that's part of the reason the staying off the trauma train is so important, because if you're on the trauma train, you're robbed of all that stuff. Not completely and not forever, but you're robbed of a lot of it. And nobody deserves that.
All right. Well, Shay, I want to thank you so much for your openness, your vulnerability, for all the work you have done, both intellectually and experientially. And I know that there are people listening to this who will begin to find healing just from the education, and hopefully the resources. And I'll put the links, and I'll get with you afterwards via email to get links to some of the stuff we talked about, so people can follow up and find their own paths to healing. So again, thank you for all you do and for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you, Howard. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Be well.
Thank you. You too.
All right. I hope you found that valuable. I certainly got a lot out of that breathing exercise, even in the moment. And from having repeated it a few times, definitely helps. And lots of breath work and various body modalities of just paying attention to our bodies, getting in touch with them, listening to the signals that they're constantly sending us. That's one of the main keys to healing, whatever specific modality we choose. So I want to tell you that Shay emailed me after our conversation with a whole bunch of links to YouTube videos, articles, various helpful resources, and there's about a dozen of them, and you can find them all at the show notes for today's episode, which is plantyourself.com/409. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so in a whole bunch of ways. Cheapest, freest way is to leave a review wherever you get your podcast, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify or whatever else. Then leave a little review that helps other people find us and find out about the show. If you would like to become a patron of Plant Yourself and help out, you know that every episode is free to the world, and I don't do any advertising. So basically, it's me and whoever else wants to help to fund and support the show. If you would like to be one of those people, elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder with us, you can make a contribution over at plantyourself.com/gift, either a one-time via PayPal or becoming an ongoing monthly sustainer via Patreon. So garden news. Yesterday, I spent pretty much all day Memorial Day in the garden. We got some Cherokee Trail of Tears black beans into the ground. It's a sad name and a delicious and very productive bean down here in North Carolina. And also got some pickling cucumbers. And one of the happiest things is that I started a compost pile about 18 months ago, and it turned into compost. It's amazing. And this is like the richest, darkest, heaviest, loamiest soil you've ever seen. So I've been carting it from the compost pile, which I don't know why I put it so far away from the garden, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I guess it smells bad, so I wanted it far from the house. But onto the various garden beds, and things are just so happy. So a lot of good stuff happening, and we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from the blueberry harvest if the birds stay away. So a lot of good stuff happening in the garden. It's nice because when we came back from South Africa, you know, in the midst of the early panic of the pandemic, thinking there wasn't going to be food on the shelves, like we really threw ourselves into production. And now we're starting to see some of the fruits of that. Things are popping up. So nothing like seeing things you put in the ground grow and thrive. And of course, if there's still, food, we still have a supply chain. We'll be using what we can use and spreading the rest around the community in ways that feel good, whether selling or bartering or donating to food pantries and food banks. In running news, I did a good one I can't remember what day, but it was maybe a Saturday. It was a 10-miler at a 9:30 pace. So it was nice to see that I still have that in me. And it happened because I was did 5 miles at a 10-minute pace, and then I ran into my buddy who runs without a watch and with like 20-year-old sneakers and happily does an 8:30 pace while chatting. And so I just wanted to keep up with him for another 5 miles, which got me to about a 9:30 average. So things are coming back. Also, to support our local running store, they had a pay what you can sale for a bunch of stuff. I got a massage gun, which is pretty impressive. It was the Trigger Point model, not the one of the big expensive ones, not the Hyper Ice or the Theragun. It was a smaller, cheaper one with just one head, no attachments, but still packs a wallop. I recommend it if you have a couple $100 and you're tired of feeling sore and achy every time you exercise. And that wasn't an advertisement. I get no money if you buy it or not. So let's talk about thanks. Let's bring up Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace, the theme music for the show once again. And I'll remind you that is written and performed by Will Ridenauer, who is a kora player. Kora is a West African instrument. And if you go to willridenauer.com, that's R-I-D-E-N-O-U-R, Will, R-I-D-E-N-O-U-R.com, you can find more of his music and see if he's playing any, well, I don't know if anyone's playing any local shows, but maybe he's online. I don't know, I haven't checked. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons like Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Morrow, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Volkanovsky, David Bizek, Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrew, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Ramos Turkis, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Janet Benham, Gila Stair, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizo, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruthann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck. The equally mysterious Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, Inscrutable Harry R, Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Home Hedegaard, Isa Tuzanwalk, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orkowski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Mirani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, sorry about that, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagan, Tracy Gullish, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Stavish, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owens, and Sagar Nayak for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Missa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jennifer Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, hi Janet, Claire Adams, Tom Franzak, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lassert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Kushner, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, the equally mysterious Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Nolly Levine, the inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, the Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch at Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Home Hedegaard, Izatu Zinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen Jo Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justin Divich, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Trish Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagen, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paran Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, and Michael Lushton for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.